So we can we can actually just start by you saying sort of where you're joining us from. And why?
I am at a place called Intuitive Machines in the Houston spaceport, which the last time I was in Houston, which wasn't that long ago, did not exist.
Really?
But I'm like,
it's
we have a
that new?
spaceport right next to the NBL where I went every day for how many years?
But I mean, it just shows how sort of the space business is sort of exploding outwards. Exploding is the wrong word to use. I should not use that word, but
expanding.
Yeah,
expanding. Thank you, Sean. Oh, it's true, and it's actually quite. I did tour here on Friday, and they are the company that launched this small spacecraft called Odysseus, which they called Odie, which is the dog in Garfunkel.
Yes.
Right?
Garfield.
No, Garfield.
Garfield. Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
Garfield.
Yes.
And isn't he the one who always gets bullied by Garfield?
I think it might happen that way, but
I just remember him being
Underdog.
pushed off the counter all the time or something.
Exactly.
In the pursuit of lasagna or something.
I think in pursuit of food might be a commonality, but it's there's older engineers. It was interesting just to walk by some of the offices, but then there's bays where people are working with electronics, but in some of those offices, I look on the wall and I see people who have like a Snoopy award, which in the NASA program means you are someone who didn't just go the extra mile. You ran an extra marathon and probably taught others to do the same thing. And it's an award that originated with Charles Schultz as the very special award from the astronaut office. And it was never like, oh, it's your turn or whatever. It's like for
you had to do
exactly.
Really. So did you ever get a Snoopy award?
I didn't, but they're from our office, so we don't get them, right?
Yeah, that's a
But it was
pretty
actually
good
the
excuse.
Deal, the awards, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
But I think that it's good to it's a really important imperative to recognize people.
Yeah.
But this was the most. I mean, it's so genuine, and the way they used to give them, basically everyone but the person getting it would know they were getting this award. Not everyone, but people they worked with or their boss and their family. So basically I would go in having studied up on the person, and I would go in and just sit on the edge of somebody's desk and say, hey, you having a good day? and talk about their work in front of their colleagues and say, I know it's not just an individual person, but a whole team that does this. But it's a very special award. Anyway, so I would walk through seeing awards like that on the walls. Yeah. And it's where the NASA workforce is also, some folks, decide they're going to go on and move on to other places. And it still remains one big family.
I was going to say, it sounds like the culture follows it.
I think so. Or new cultures actually, get to be interchanged. I used to say when I was at NASA and I was helping to merge the supply ship entities like the mission controls and the SpaceXs. And I would say, well, companies like SpaceX, I mean, sometimes they make a decision and they don't even have a meeting. And
how does that
this is just between us. Does that make you feel good?
It does, actually. Because it's not like we ignore your input. It's like, okay, who needs to be in on this? And everybody is tuned to when they are needed, right? And it does mean people work a lot, I'm sure. I can't speak for SpaceX, but I do know that, sometimes, I don't know, there's this little curve where you say, hey, more people, we should make sure we don't forget anybody. And I'm sure they recognize those growing pains. Yeah. But I think sometimes you kind of go, it's the weekly meeting about that. We're going to be there an hour.
Yep.
And I said, to my group, the robotics group, I said, so the next time you go to a meeting, think about what does success mean here? And shouldn't we all walk out the door as soon as we've achieved success so we can get to work?
Yeah. No, I love that. It's it parallels something that we were talking about just before we came on, but that need for efficiency and focus.
Mm-hmm. And asking yourself that question, could this have been an email instead of a meeting? Could this have been a Slack message instead of email?
You remember, we're coming from academia, so meetings seem to be everything, and there's never enough bureaucracy, apparently.
Well, but those face-to-face meetings, and I don't know. There was I've been actually running around handing out my book to people that helped with it, and the photo TV people who helped me find the pictures and things like that. And they're people I never met. And it's just really nice to say thank you in person.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So anyway, this is great. So we weren't going to do a cold open, but we
got one.
This is a fantastic cold open. So we should hand it over to Sean to formally start the program.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a quick pause, and then we'll just introduce the show, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm Sean Leahy, joined by my co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Cady Coleman joining us. And I have a long bio here, Cady, so I hope this doesn't embarrass you to read it. But there's so much in here, and we could spend the rest of the next hour just unpacking all of the cool stuff.
Remember, we get to write those. I'm just saying, okay? And my mom especially wanted to be impressed when she was around.
Well, I thought you were going to say your mother wrote it, but
I think we would all. Now that's a good challenge. We should, if we have the opportunity to have your mother write your own professional bio. Sean is the sweetest boy. Just hire him for whatever, I don't know.
I have stories.
Yes. Well, and I hope we can get into some of them. But let me read this because this is impressive and everyone needs to be wowed by our special guest here. So Cady Coleman, a former NASA astronaut, retired U.S. Air Force colonel with more than 180 days in space, accumulated during 2 space shuttle missions and a 6-month expedition to the International Space Station as lead robotics and lead science officer. Cady has served in a variety of roles within the astronaut office, including chief of robotics and lead astronaut for the integration of supply ships from NASA's commercial partners. Before retiring from NASA, she led the open innovation and public-private partnership efforts for NASA's chief technologist. This is the part I think gets even more impressive. A popular public speaker and media consultant, also serves as a research affiliate to MIT's Media Lab, a regular contributor to ABC News, and has co-hosted the Arizona State University's Mission Interplanetary podcast that Andrew might know a little thing about.
I've heard about this. Yes.
Heard about that one. But also as an amateur flute player, known for your famous space duet with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and her work from space with the acclaimed Irish band The Chieftains, which is my mother will be very pleased about that. But also that you got an opportunity to coach Sandra Bullock from the International Space Station in preparation for her role in Gravity, which is so cool. Cady, you also serve on several boards, including the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, Greenfield Community College, and the ISS National Lab Education Advisory Group. So that is cool. That is all awesome. And it also would be remiss if we didn't mention your new book that just came out this summer.
Which I think we both have copies of.
Look at that. Look at that.
Oh, I don't know how to do a screen. I'm taking a picture. Show me again.
We'll hold here.
Hold on. Okay.
So Cady's new book entitled
so
Sharing
much.
Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change about her NASA experiences and the insights gained as an astronaut is available now wherever you can get your books. And I did notice, Cady, which is really cool, actually on your website, you can request a personalized copy, which is super cool.
It's true. It's true. And actually even better, I've been handing out cards here. There's not to advertise, but there's a local bookstore. And this is the way it works, like in small towns. They have, I autograph all their books, and when something needs personalized, they write me an email. I do that personalized copy. I put it inside the door of the barn, and they pick it up.
Oh, really?
Oh, very cool.
Really? So, Roundabout Bookstore, one word.
Roundabout
.com.
Bookstore.
Roundabout Bookstore. Check it out.
And just remind people where in the world that is.
That is in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. Actually, the bookstore's in Greenfield.
Okay.
But,
all right.
Yeah. They also have Boswell's in Shelburne, which is always been a generation of Boswell the cat. We're on Boswell number 5.
Fantastic. Love small bookstores. So much fun.
Me too.
They're sadly a dying breed of retail, but still amazing when you can get them and support them when you can.
Yep.
Amazon's got enough. So
well, and I think more and more people like to actually read a physical book these days.
It's funny you should say that. I've been using a Kindle for ages, but I hanker after real books, and so now I find myself reading more actual paper books.
And when I go by the bookstores, and I find all these people I haven't met, but sort of new, and they're like, oh yeah, I come here all the time. So It's nice.
So how do we segue from bookstores to space? There must be several easy links.
Did you take any books to space with you?
I did actually. I took some books by my head went away. I'm thinking. It's a series called Peter and the Starcatchers, and it's written by Dave Barry, and his first name ran out of my head, Pearson. I know him, but anyways, and so it's a series of books for teenagers. It's got like smart girls, smart boys, sword fighting, fairy dust, everybody flies.
That sounds pretty cool.
You know, they figure out a world and they're teenagers, which I think is really. And so I used to read those books to my son when he was 10 when I went to space.
Oh, right.
And
So
took
I
them
remember
up there.
this. Yes, you used to read them to him.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Yep.
I love that.
But I also took a copy of. You guys are catching me on kind of a tired day. Sorry.
You're fitting right. Trust me, you're fitting right into this crew. This is how we do every episode.
From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne.
Oh, yes.
Excellent. Yes.
Yes. I knew my husband for a long time. I went to his house for Thanksgiving, their sort of family home. And of course, there's a lot of commotion and it's, a little bit terrifying to meet everybody's mom and dad and all those things. And so I just go to the books on the wall and look at the books. And it was the first book I saw.
Oh, very cool.
And I just thought, it's so appropriate because, I think you read books and you bring books to think about another world or the way someone else thinks about something and try it on. And it just seemed so fitting to make sure that those thoughts were on board when we were living in space.
Yeah. I love that idea. So you've both got the sort of fantasy stuff and you've got the really early science fiction, sort of going to one of the coolest places at the time, sort of not even on Earth. And I love that juxtaposition of all three.
Exactly. And to have, I'm here at Intuitive Machines, actually just visiting. And it just happened to be today. And there's several folks that one of the folks wanted me to meet, young folks that are really interested in space and human space flight, and just finding out what they're interested in and the fact that they're so excited about what they're doing. I wanted to come. I toured here the other day, and I wanted to come and meet some more of the folks, and I don't know, just the fact that they landed on the moon,
which is incredible.
Last February. Right?
Yeah, it was wild. That's what I was saying. I was like, not very many people can say that they have landed something on the moon. That's really amazing. And
I didn't put that noun in there, something. But, it's as if they have landed on the moon, really. Because, if you don't have the person that did this for the propulsion or the software or... I like the fact that there's real people behind each of those steps. But we haven't had an American spacecraft land on the moon since 1972.
Yeah.
And... they did it. And they actually did have a series of challenges that I think they did a really nice job of getting a lot of data for future missions.
Yeah. But we were chatting briefly about them before this recording, and they were talking about the challenges. But the reality is that there are always challenges in space, it seems. The story, and I wasn't intending to segue to the book, but I think this is relevant. The story seems to be how you approach those challenges, not whether there are challenges or not.
Exactly. And that everybody's going to have their own way when faced with an issue or a problem or a challenge. And that includes when you walk into a room and people kind of look at you sort of like, I wonder what they're going to do here. As opposed to, wow, I wonder what they're going to do here. I can't wait to meet them. Do you know, there's two different ways to think about that. And I think it's, it takes, even at NASA, you'll have younger people, older people, and it takes some mixing together and appreciating what each other brings when it could be so very different. And yet it is those differences that are going to guarantee more progress, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly. So, Cady, if I may, I will say you're the second astronaut I've ever met. First one I've ever been.
You like me better, right?
I do, because I've actually been able to talk to you. I met super briefly. I used to live in the Netherlands, and
André Kuipers.
That's exactly who I met about 10 years ago at STech over in Noordwijk. And it was like a school. I used to do some stuff there from time to time, and it was like a big thing. So I, along with like 400 other school-age kids, got to meet him. But if you would allow me, can I ask you, which is a question you've probably heard 1,000 times, and have answered. And it's even, you've got some good anecdotes in the book as well. Can you talk about what it is like to actually go to space as a human in that first? And then the one question I'm really curious about is, especially when you're on, for example, like the time at the ISS, is that first morning or whatever it would be, that first time you wake up there and you're just there. And what does that feel like to be suddenly in this otherworldly space? And like, I just can only imagine the pinch me moment of like, is this real? I get to do this. How is this? So I'm really curious to hear from your
Sean's a space nerd.
I'm a space nerd. And this is so much fun. I have 1,000 questions on like literally you're here I could ask you, but actually, I'm so curious about that. Like the experience of it. What did it feel like?
Well, I loved it. I literally, I mean, it isn't as if every day was a perfect day. I mean, it was actually hard and stressful and pressure filled in that the moments seemed precious in terms of how much work you got done that would put us one step closer to understanding more either about future spaceflight or about life on Earth. Right. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot, but still, I literally would wake up every morning and I'd know that I was like in space. And I did actually sleep curled up like a ball and wouldn't always tether my sleeping bag to the wall because I kind of liked waking up wherever. And the cabins aren't huge, but they're big enough when you're small like me.
Could imagine the rest of the crew just saying, there goes Cady again.
Yeah. Did you ask everybody else how they felt about it? They're like, would you strap yourself to the wall already?
No, we have cabins.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, they are not
like
big.
Yes.
I mean, we are not talking about being the larger stall in the public bathroom. Okay,
Yes.
Not that big, but a regular one.
Okay,
close, a little, still a little big. But so they're small. But actually, Paolo Nespoli, who's also a good friend of Andre Kuiper's, because we all trained together in Star City at the same time for our missions. But
very cool.
Paolo is like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and a new Paolo comes. And I'm actually pretty efficient like that too, but Paolo taught me, I mean, we'd be training and we'd have a little break, 10 minutes waiting for somebody to come and teach us something. And you look over and Paolo's like laying on the floor, sound asleep, corner of the room, whatever. And it was the same on the ISS, except he would just tuck his toes under some of the bungee cords or under, like, we have railings, just like a railing on a stairwell. We have railings across where we can use them to navigate, but you can tuck your toes under. We actually came home with calluses on the tops of our feet.
Oh, really? From hooking so you don't float away? You can just
exactly.
lock yourself in?
So after dinner, I'd look over and Paolo would just be like, kind of bobbing a little bit. But when you wake up in your cabin, you're definitely alone. And it's also this kind of twilighty sort of time. I would often, wake up and maybe in the middle of the night, maybe you have to pee, right? And it's almost like you're in a fish tank and you're one of the fish that go along the bottom because you come out and you just give yourself a little push and you're the only one there. And I would just think, wow, the world is still magic.
Yeah.
Because you just give yourself this tiny little push. If I take my hair off my head and used it to push against a handrail, I could push myself across the entire station.
Wow. Just from a hair?
Just so it's so, and I'm not so, Andrew knows, I'm not so graceful down here, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that.
But up in there, it's interesting to learn how to give yourself just the right angle to go the way you want to go.
Yeah.
And then I call it tending, and then you're not quite on course, and you tend yourself here, and a little nudge here as you fly by. But to me, the flying just reminds you that you are at a place that is so different, and that you should really think about not what am I doing, how are things, do I like this, but what else could we do here now that we understand that, I know it's not magic, right? It's actually physics, right? But now that I understand the possibilities of, a drop, actually there's a picture I've used of Andre Kuiper's in many of my presentations where there's a big blob of water with an air bubble in it. Mm-hmm. And Andre's face is reflected like in the bubble, in the inside. I mean, it's just over and over.
Like
inside.
Nested in the...
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, you realize that, wow, this is something we can't really study like this on the ground because puddles, liquid speed puddles. And I hate to talk physics with the physicist. I'm looking right at him. So
Mark,
I really
physics
liked
stuff
waking
his
up
way all
that
the
way.
time. It's fine.
Yeah. So actually, we should probably say, because it was implied but not explicit, that Cady and I go way back with the Mission Interplanetary podcast. So we're used to this banter. Yes,
it's true. It's true.
But I love that the tables are turned now. So now I can actually interview you, and you get a chance to talk.
Actually, we didn't interview each other. But I was going to say that one thing I loved. I mean, I was a little late to our little gathering here, and is that in space, of course, that would happen a bit as well. And what I found is that the same person that launches from Earth is the same one you find up in space. People don't really change, and neither do you. So you have to actually work out all your little differences or quirks, or how to, understand each other, down on the ground. But I would wake up, and of course, I basically stayed up late. And I would do all the studying and reading of procedures and making sure I could find stuff. So I was up kind of late. But then I would wake up like 5 minutes before the Monday or the morning conference with Mission Control. Give myself that push down the module, hook a right into the place where the the bathroom and the treadmill and the big window are, and brush my teeth and be there just as they were saying hello. I would slide into second base, which I always longed to do.
So I've got to ask. I know this was on your list of questions, Sean, but I'm going to jump ahead. So I love talking to you about what it was like in space and what it is like in space, Cady, because there's such an enthusiasm there. But one of the things that a lot of people talk about is, why should we send humans into space anyway? Why not just send robots? Why not just do it the utilitarian way? And I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Why send people up into space?
Well, first of all, I don't want to make a choice.
Right.
I mean, I think that we should have both.
Sure.
And, this going up there, we're sending humans, but they're living on a space station. And if you look at the space shuttle, then there's all these switches, and they look just like the switches in an airplane, like an old-fashioned airplane. So there's all these switches in places the crew would do things. But on the space station, now it's on the computer. And we spent all this time training and understanding, how do we change the temperature in the module, or how do we know if the heat exchanger is working or not, and what the graphic looks like, what it looks like when things are going badly and well, and when we hear an alarm, how do we check what's going on? And all that stuff is necessary, but every single action that the computer can take, that we don't have to take, that the ground can take, that we don't have to take, is essential. Because we want to do the things that only humans can do.
Right.
And actually crew time, the amount of time that the crew has to spend on work up there, can be quite limited because of how much time you're spending on maintenance and things like that. So, we had a Robonaut up there, a Robonaut robot. And the purpose was, how can we work alongside? And I think that the Robonaut would be way better at inventory than I would. Okay, I mean,
all the boring tasks.
Well, boring, but even, airflow measurement is a really critical thing up there. How much air is being recycled, and what is the chemical content of it? And so they want you to be making these measurements with it looks like a little antenna. You'd pull out almost like a little radio that you'd pull up the antenna, and you're going to point it with a certain angle and take that measurement there. And in doing it, we would feel like if we moved even just a little bit up or down, the numbers were so different. So you're doing this work where you just feel like, hello, do these numbers really mean something to you? Because they look like garbage to me, right?
Yeah.
And Robonaut could be precise. You say 75 degrees to Robonaut, and that's what you get.
Right.
And it also the time it took. I mean, it would, cut it by, 40%.
Wow.
So I think both, and at the same, but also, when things don't work, that's when you really wish that you had a human. And we also joke around that there's two ways to be in trouble in space. The first one is to not follow the procedure, and the second one is to follow the procedure. Because sometimes there's things written in there that made sense to the person writing that then you have forgotten the translation, and we're getting better at that.
Yeah, I was going to say we've all watched the sci-fi movies where someone has to go rogue in order to solve the problem.
But you did ask me why, right? Well, and I love that, these kids, they're not kids, right? They're young adults, but or they're adults. But anyways, they really helped me solve a number of little computer problems for the podcast, which was great. But I was going to say it's also the work that you do up there.
Yeah.
Which really does come right back to Earth. Like I asked actually the eye doctor today, because there's all these measurements that I used to have to go to a special building and these big machines. And because we found that people up in space were having differing degrees of swelling of the optic nerve, which might have indicated actually swelling in your brain, right? And these are problems or challenges or things we need to understand before we send people on a really long journey. Right.
Yeah.
And so they've got a lot of these instruments and they've developed ones. And even I was sitting there waiting. I don't know if any of you are old enough to have those glaucoma tests where there's like a little they get that thing and you have to pretend that you don't mind. Right. Yes. The horrible light. And I found my whole body was like ready. Like, and then it was just like this little, and then he goes, okay, right eye. And I'm like, what about the puff? He goes, oh, Cady, we don't do the puff. Did you hear the little, like it's almost like a little hummingbird? Yeah, that's what we do.
No, I remember the puffs.
Funny you mentioned that test. I remember it was so unpleasant. I think I saw the back of my own brain when they were doing, it was like I saw a part of me that I didn't know I could, from
That's
that.
Very funny.
It was
the eye test actually. And I love that we're having more and more people going to space where, there was a strict physical to get this job. And I'm lucky enough to have a, fairly sort of boring medical history, which meant that I could then be a non-boring lab rat. Right.
Yeah. Well, so kind of just building on some of like the physical challenges of space flight and stuff like that. Because again, I think, Andrew, we've had this conversation a little bit before with, again, thinking about, looking at Mars, for example, or even the moon, we can say, right? So looking at space exploration and that question of robotics versus humans. And, I think I read somewhere that, even the fastest rover on Mars, for example, is about 13 times slower than what a human could crawl and get, so the amount of work that the amount of science that could be done in such a short period of time would far exceed how much we could do for a, decades worth of rover scientific discovery and things like that. But still kind of coming back to that idea of this sort of, because I'm in line with you. I think the answer is both, but I think there is this tension or question between, are humans suited for longer, farther explorations, given, the radiation, the unknown of long-term effects of space, and or like even if they get to Mars, like what does 38% gravity do to the human body over time? Our systems are designed for one gravity. But like I don't know. I'm curious just what your thought. Do you think that's something that we can solve to be able to prepare humans for a deeper amount of sort of space exploration outside of just sort of like the ISS range of sort of, synchronous space flight?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, people will go. It's not a question, suited or not. In spacesuits or not.
I was going to say, fairly short career if you go unsuited.
Actually, we were just talking about when, like, they write flight rules of like, what if this happens? What if this happens? Well, if it turns out that somebody's backpack on their spacesuit isn't working, are they still going to get to go outside? And the answer, of course, is no, right? But we write these things, we make these decisions before people go and they're in the heat of the moment. And one of the jokes was, you have the space shuttle and those two giant solid rocket boosters. And, when you've been laying on your back, waiting for launch and maybe for the third or fourth, or in my case, the seventh attempt, and, waiting for hours, let alone a month. And they say, hey, it doesn't look like the second solid rocket booster is going to be working, but do you guys want to go anyway? And everybody be like, let's go.
Yep.
Well, but I don't mean that people would actually, it's kind of a joke, but we will solve these things. And that's why I think it's interesting. I think people have to read and listen carefully to the news and to realize that like tests like the new spacesuit, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging way, but a very complimentary way, the new spacesuit configurations that SpaceX was looking at on the Polaris Dawn mission, where I thought, and in 6 months they're thinking they're going to design a new spacesuit and bring a person. And I've met one of those people, and I mean, you just find yourself almost leaping out of your seat, just going, "Do you understand how difficult this is?" And not wanting to be sort of old, stodgy NASA, like, there's so many things that could go wrong, and you let people solve problems creatively. But what their approach was, what are the big rocks, so to speak, that are in the way of sending people to space safely, and letting them and having them be able to go outside the spacecraft in suits that could fit lots of people, which of course I'm a fan of.
Yes.
And they basically were looking at, how do we take this our spacecraft down to vacuum safely? Instead of talking about radiation, let's go measure it in this place, in some places where we know it's high. And I was worried about that for that crew, but it turns out that in doing that, they got probably about, I want to say a third, but it was some fraction of the amount of radiation that somebody like me that spent 6 months up there in the space station would get. So, in just, a couple orbits, they got that. But still, it's the number of these things that are approximated. And then everybody says, well, we'd better make sure it's 10 or 20 or 30% safer than that. And then things are over-designed.
You can see it restricts things. So I did want to ask you about the Polaris 2 mission, because just watching it, there are a couple of things that really struck me. One is the design of those spacesuits, which was, to me, it seemed completely radical compared to what you usually see with EVAs.
How come?
It just seemed to be far more flexible, and which is why I wanted to ask you about it, because it's very hard for me to sort of gauge sort of how big a deal it was. But it seemed like it was snugger fitting. It was sort of more sort of body formed. I'm assuming that it's easier to adjust them to different sort of body shapes and body types, and a lot less encumbrance around it. But the other thing that really got me, it really worried me, this approach of taking the whole capsule down to vacuum. And I'd love to know whether that's something that just felt quite sort of reasonable to you as somebody that's been up there in space.
No, I think everybody's, I mean, it's an unbelievably big deal to do that, to go to vacuum. And yet there is, I would talk to folks in between, and just ask them, how they're doing and how's that going, and understanding that there was a lot of communication between people with big ideas and really good ideas and people who had been working in the field for a long time.
Yeah.
And that they were asking questions, they were listening, they were good conversations, and they also did really careful, smart work. And found chambers that they can bring the whole thing down to vacuum. They found some things that they were just never going to be comfortable bringing them to vacuum, and they made a container that where they would put some things in. So they're pretty smart. They're pretty smart. They're very smart. But these audacious things actually had I would say just a lot of real thought. And then when things, Candidly, I think that things turned out to be harder than they had anticipated. I think they took longer. I think they were harder. I think they had to adjust their goals. But, that's all you can ask of anybody.
That's still how you learn, I guess.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think even for mobility in the suit, I think we need suits that are more mobile than what I saw from those suits, with better ability to move wrists and shoulders and things like that. But it's definitely an approach and how to build it in a way that could be more fitting more people, kind of thing. The Axiom folks now have the spacesuit contract for the surface suit, so the suit for up on Gateway, and they're working with Prada.
Yeah,
and if you think back to
designer spacesuit,
well, no, but think about this. There's stuff that you buy at a generic store, and I don't, Andrew, unless things have changed, no ordinary black T-shirt will do for you. Okay?
No. There's a specific one, and I'm so sorry to disappoint not wearing black T-shirt today. It was a conscious decision this morning not to, and I'm regretting it.
No, I'm just teasing. No, but there's a certain shape and flow and the drape, right? Yep. And so these are, and actually in the early days, the first spacesuits, and actually all the way through the shuttle program, was the David Clark company that made headsets. But they also made underwear. The first people sewing spacesuits were underwear designers and seamstresses, many of them women, right? Because they knew how to make
Form the
things
body
functional different.
Interesting.
So it's not shocking to me, although I'll be.
Yeah.
I mean, their spacesuits still kind of what they showed at the big international meeting still looked a little like what we have.
Think of spacesuits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to. Can I just say that sort of. Like I just think it's important that the audience understand how important a subject this is. Mm-hmm. It's not like, hey, I'm 5'4", maybe 5'3.5" now, right? And it's only fair if something fits me. But we can't afford, with the challenges that we have, not to be able to have all sorts of different people be on the team.
Yep.
And I think it's an sort of not usually perceived hazard or thing that happens of great consequence, which is when people don't have the right equipment. And it's not just in space, it's in construction, it's in the operating room.
Yeah, I was going to say,
until
it's
they got
medical
those
procedures,
tables.
medical research.
I mean, it's in your car. Hello, cars are, I mean, you know, that the fact that, you know, my husband's like, I hate that furry thing on the seatbelt. I go, well, so do I, sweetie, but it cuts me across the neck. Okay. Anyway, so if they did discontinue the smaller spacesuit, which affected a lot of people, at least a third of the women. It affected me too, but I was on that edge where we could figure out some ways, and I did that not by myself, but with other folks too, to make the really big, large, medium suit work. Yeah. And so I did that, and I got, and in order to go to the space station at the time, we needed, and still need, 3 spacewalkers on the sort of European, US, Canadian, Japanese side. 2 spacewalkers and a backup. And when you only have 3 seats in the capsule, this was then when the Soyuz, the Russian Soyuz, that means everyone has to be qualified in EVA, in spacewalking. Yep. And if I didn't qualify in that medium suit, I would have waited 11 years to fly and live on the space station. And that's why in developing these new spacesuits now, these new vehicles, these lunar rovers, I mean, you know, there's a lot of people where the pedals are. I mean, one of the big restrictions in, you know, airplane flying, you know, for the military and places is your seated height and reaching the pedals,
reaching the controls,
right? Something that just sounds so trivial and yet is so fundamental. And we've talked about this before, Cady, but it seems to be so important. That when people sort of these days tend to roll their eyes at the idea of diversity, you begin to understand how critically important it is to make sure that everybody who has the inherent capability to be part of a team and be part of a mission actually gets the opportunity to do that to the best of their ability.
And just thinking into, I mean, if you think about the big plate that would be across our chest in the spacesuit, and it has our tools, have tool arms, and everything is kind of attached to our chest. Well, it turns out that when they tried to make smaller spacesuits, the plate was too big. Right. And it's easier to scale up than it is to scale down. I mean, well, I mean, you know, it's, but it's not.
The tools are the same size, right?
Because people go, stay there. You know, and anyways, so I think it's important for people to know that there's consequences in so many fields, and that's why whatever makes it slower to be able to include more people in the solution is something we can't afford. Yeah.
So we should just talk a little bit about Artemis from that perspective, because Artemis is the mission to get people to the moon ultimately, or get people back to the moon. But certainly from my observations, it's been a mission where we've been thinking critically about who gets to go and how we design systems around them. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean,
was there a question there, Andrew?
No, I'm just doing the academic thing. Let me try and turn that into a question. No. But I was to ask from your perspective whether you see this as very significant progress in terms of how people are even thinking about the systems they're building.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly for men and women, you're not having to design different, you know, software or, you know, these kinds of things. It's more about the physical, you know, controls and suits and things like that. But the U.S. is committed to landing the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. Yep. And, you know, I look at again, one of the flights where a billionaire didn't bring other billionaires, but brought different kinds of people that I think he thought should come to space. And one of those was a woman who won the entrepreneurial contest, Cyan Proctor.
Yes.
And Cyan is also a private pilot. and she became the pilot of that spacecraft. And by doing that, she became the first Black woman to pilot a spacecraft.
Which is incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long would we have waited for that? And what does it mean to the future? And what does it mean to somebody who reads a book about Cyan and then thinks, I'm going to do that? I tell this story about I'm on an Irish stamp in very, very good company
cool.
with other
I
astronauts.
love the way you
of,
just
I'm gonna
throw
add
that
to your-
into
I'm
the
gonna add that to your
conversation. I
bio.
just happen to
Hold
be
on.
on a stamp.
of other astronauts of Irish descent.
Right.
And we're all in different vehicles, but it's Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Eileen Collins, and myself.
Oh, very cool.
And kids in Ireland go to mail a letter, and it's just no big deal to have women astronauts on the stamp. And that came from a single stamp designer that said, okay, would it be okay if all the people on the stamps aren't dead yet? Because often,
Right. Yep.
Usually that's true.
he's got kids and he wanted women on the stamps, and that was one of the ways to do that. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. So this question can go nowhere if you've never seen the show. But I'm curious.
Your show? This show? No. Oh,
Well, you're a subscriber to Modem Futura, sure, of course.
almost. I was driving. I could not hit subscribe, but I did listen.
She
It'll
will
happen
be by the
afterwards.
time this
Yeah.
airs.
Actually, I have loved the parts that I have heard.
Well, good. Well, what I was going to ask you about, if you're familiar with the Apple TV show For All Mankind.
I am. Yep.
Yeah, and so because I've been watching that throughout. I've been enjoying it as a fun TV show. But one of the things that, to me, that has been, I think, one of the most inspiring parts, besides the excitement of all the cool sort of, and for people who aren't familiar, the show takes a revisionist history approach where the Soviet Union actually beat the U.S. to the moon landing. And so the space race never cooled off. In fact, it had accelerated. And I think we're up now in the show to like quasi current day where we have colonies on Mars and the moon and all this stuff. But in that show, the diversity, because of the space race or just presenting it as a different opportunity, portrays women of color, all kinds of diversity in those mission critical firsts of establishing colonies on the moon and stuff like that. And I take away that I have two small kids. I have the royal pair. I've got a boy and a girl. And for me, one of the things that's so powerful that I hope continues to see is, again, seeing that representation across the board in these spaces where the true history is much more slanted, right? They're mostly white men who have dominated this space, literally, I guess. But so I'm just kind of curious what your thought is on the role of the storytelling like that movie or others in terms of inciting excitement in generation and for people, for young people, women, young girls getting interested in STEM specifically, or even just in STEM related fields, right? Where they're interested in, I would like to be a part of something like that type of exploration. So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective as someone who has worked and done these things, what the role of sort of that type of portrayal can do to in basically excite a new generation of future astronauts and scientists and engineers and what have you.
Well, I think you actually said everything really right and important, in that I'm just a huge fan of that kind of storytelling. And I don't know which came first or come alongside. There's a woman named Mary Robinette Kowal that wrote a series of books called the Lady Astronaut series. And it's where, I won't give it away, but, something terrible happens on Earth and they have to leave the planet. It's like the 1950s. And the only people that are around and can find each other are a group of men, women, people of color with various abilities and skills and actually disabilities as well, right? And they're the ones that make things work. And so you see this like world that works. It goes places you would like to go. And I think it just builds into you that, this is really possible. And also, I just think it's like some people get upset about what's inaccurate in some of the movies. And I don't like it when it makes the movie lose such credibility. I usually am sort of glass half
Sure.
full. right?
You can suspend reality and enjoy the story. Yeah.
But I think that I do think that they have immense power, especially if they're really well made, good, and they end up being seen by a lot of people. And that's where, I just really just dread when there's something really great, space fiction thing and it's all guys or something like that. Because I mean, in fact, they were doing a National Geographic and a British Channel 4 live from the space station shows. 2 shows, one production company, one on Friday night, one on Sunday, 2 different shows, right? But one group of astronauts, and it happened to be 6 guys up on the space station. And to me, that's like a national emergency. Like there's some 9-year-old girl that is going to see this, and she doesn't even know that somebody's saying, by the way, not really you. And it says that to her friends too, both guys and girls. So I think these things are really great. And I also, this is what I have observed is the Martian movie. Okay. The NASA astronaut selection. I mean, I applied in 1992 or for the 92 class, and there were something around 2,400 people that applied and, selected 19 Americans. There were 5 foreign astronauts as well. And then there's 1995. There's different years of classes. It's kind of a sporadic. When does NASA need astronauts? And you should always apply if you think you're qualified. Apply. But I think before the Martian movie came out, they were up to about 6,000 people applying for a selection. That movie came out, 18,000 people applied.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think
very cool.
Most of them were qualified.
Goodness
Certainly a few thousand that were not. But I think people were like, "Oh, if they're going, and I want to be with it, I'd better raise my hand."
That could be me.
And so I just think there's immense power, and that has to be used wisely. That's why a lot of us like to help with those productions, with the credibility, or to help them understand how maybe more diversity could be worked in, because it really either is there now or should be.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really powerful too. Because so just thinking when you just mentioned The Martian, I was also thinking of, not connected to the same story, but Andy Weir came out with another book called Artemis, which is about a city, this cool city. But again, and the main character is this plucky young female who's doing all kinds of, playing the traditional role of the male hero from stories. But again, told from such a refreshing perspective of that. And then again, the other one I'll mention too, just that I saw recently, and I'm drawing a total blank all of a sudden on the name of it, but there was another Apple TV show that was focusing on a astronaut who was a female who experienced, of course, there's like this time dilation, the weird, a glitch in the, and she switches realities or whatever. But it was focusing, and it was, so half the show is sort of showing sort of her experiences as a commander on the International Space Station, in normal, and then of course this accident happens and it's, crazy. And then sci-fi goes from there. But again, it's setting that expectation and that root of showing this person in this position of authority and power and knowledge in a way that is trying to normalize it in a way, which I think is so, they're not going like, it's a woman who is in charge. It's just, no, she's just the person who's running the show. And it's normalizing that aspect. And I think that was really, that's for me, I really enjoy those where they can normalize it and not put a spotlight on it to be like, we're making this an intentional call, but trying to make it feel more normalized. I think that's what's powerful for a lot of, especially younger generations to see that as that's just the way it is.
And even I think normalizing different styles of leadership.
Yeah.
Where you get to notice that person's in charge, but they're not always telling people what to do. Right. And actually, there's a new documentary about Eileen Collins as the first woman to command the space shuttle. And I was on that crew. My mother being very proud that I was the other woman. Anyways, my mom made that joke. But anyways, it's neat to see, different styles of leadership just as strong, but maybe in different ways. And I felt like that on our mission as well, being, I'm one of 6 people and we all contribute something. And I happen to be the person that kind of sees everybody on the crew and is kind of the glue that helps them see each other. And it may not be that I'm in charge. I was not actually the commander, but certainly I would say we're all, we all can play a very pivotal role.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did remember the name. It was Constellation. So
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
also
I
really
wanted
creepy.
Oh, creepy. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe it looked.
Eerie,
try.
creepy. Yeah, it's cool. But
I am
yeah.
not good at scary movies. Okay.
It's not, I wouldn't say scary. It's not scary. It's like eerie because you're like, and it's also a little bit of mystery. You're trying to figure out like what happened. So anyway.
Well, but getting back to this idea of people, I've been thinking a lot about the fact that everyone is so interested in Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore up there on the ISS and being stranded. And, and I think that when things are about people, it makes a big difference. Like we were talking about robotic versus, crewed spacecraft. And we've had pictures taken of Earthrise, right?
Yep.
By satellites.
Yep.
And it didn't get all that noticed until a person took that picture, and you're seeing it through their eyes. And I've been actually quite fascinated with the fascination with Butch and Sonny, in that, I do some consulting for the media and commentary and things. And I did get to say what I had to say. My book was coming out, so I was kind of busy. And but they would be having these stories, and I talked to the producer. I go, are they not getting the message that, like, these are real professionals. They both got so much experience, and the fact that they worked for a couple of years on this mission, and we're going to have a 8-day mission.
Yeah.
I mean, can you say sacrifice? I mean, it's really hard, but that's your job, and they were up for it. And then to be told you actually get to stay and do some work, and the amount of, the fact that they're up there and there's 2 extra people. There's always a to-do list on the space station.
Sure.
And when we talked about crew time earlier, like how much time does the crew have? Well, when the crew has to like bring water bags back and forth because it's never been top on the list to connect those 2 pipes, and you have to shut down the plumbing, and there won't be a bathroom. And, while you do that thing, and what if it doesn't work? But the fact that there's sort of that little friction built in many different ways really eats up the crew time. So Sonny and Butch just went to town on the to-do list. And I would tell scientists out there, like, it is a new day on the space station in terms of there's so much that's out of the way that is making operations better. And it's a time for new experiments.
Yeah. No, I remember talking to you sort of as that was going on, and you saying sort of, when I was sort of saying, is this an issue? You were saying, are you kidding? They get to spend all that extra time up there.
Well, it's funny, Cady. I'm like, can you see my notes? Because that was one of my questions.
Really?
and here, this was my question. Was like, one, that they're stranded, yes, and also the human element of that, because we thrive on that, the human boiling. But my question to you, as someone who's again, who has lived that experience where you've gotten to go, is, are they really bummed? Or is this one of those things where you're like, oh no, we're stuck here, and internally you're like, I get to be on this space station for
So Sonny's husband says, well, space is pretty much Sonny's happy place.
Yeah.
Right.
And anybody doesn't believe that. You look at her face, on the mission. But there's Sonny gave a tour way back on her first mission of the space station. You just look up Sonny Williams space station tour, and you'll see it all. I do think there's something really interesting to think about why are people so fascinated with, that they're worried, because we've had people, but it's been so public, and they just won't, no matter what NASA says, no matter what Sonny and Butch say, people won't stop worrying. In fact, Sonny was accused of being in bad health, right?
Yeah. All these things are like, look at her eyes, look at her pores on her nose. That must indicate they're running out of food.
It's these armchair experts, and I say that seriously.
It was in serious publications speculating. I don't know, kind of looking skinny. I will say, I did actually lose like 12 pounds up on the space station. I was like, yes. I will say, you should never, ever go shopping and buy clothes right off the space station, after you get back, because I have some really nice clothes I bought then, and they're still hanging in the closet, right? Just you gain that weight back. Anyways, but I do think it is a sacrifice. I think Butch is missing, his senior year with his daughter in high school, something they had counted on as a family. And, like we all did in the pandemic. I like what Butch said. He said, we're trained, and we're here for the mission. And when the mission changes, we say, okay, let's start from here. So if you think we're stuck up here, we're starting from stuck.
Yeah.
And I'm sure as a family, they're figuring that out, Sunny and her husband as well. And also, there's other people that didn't get to go because we needed to have 2 seats for Sunny and Bush, which they called the rescue mission. I'm like, it's not, it's a regular mission. Anyways, but I think if we could figure out between the 3 of us here on the podcast, what is it that makes people so interested? Then, what that motivation, wanting people wanting to know about space and just needing to know, I think we could use that to sell a lot of stuff, and we could all have a company. But I in a serious way, I will say that space. There's something very compelling about space and about humans going to space. And Andrew and I have in the past on our podcast kind of used that to talk about things that were common to everybody.
Right. Yep.
But they wouldn't necessarily. And that means experiments. That means science. And so I just think the compelling nature of space, how can we, knowing how true it really is, what can we use that for down here on Earth to compel people to care about challenges and problems that probably sort of scare them? They're afraid they can't meet.
I think that's really true and really important. And so often I find people talking about this dichotomy between Earth and space, saying we shouldn't be spending money on space because we've got so many problems on Earth. And yet I think you've just hit the nail on the head that you can't separate them out. That there is something inherently human in both experiencing space, experiencing it through other people, but using that as a lens to understand our situation on Earth and who we are here. And if you get rid of space, you diminish us somehow, it seems.
Or that idea that there's something else out there and we could find it. And I think that research is exploration. I think art is exploration. And there's this sort of hope that there could be something different out there. And I think that's actually, candidly, not to take it a different direction. I don't want to go there really, but I think that's what upsets people about the accidents, the space accidents that involve humans.
Right.
Is that it kind of says, see, life is not so hopeful. The impossible can't happen. When actually, really, it still can.
Yes. Yeah, which is really exciting.
And so that kind of reminds us. So one of the things that I had written down to talk about is somewhat related to that. This whole kind of threaded conversation of the last few moments here. Is this idea, and this, I guess this is an open question, I think up until, present day included, all of these explorations are counted as round trip, right? That it's people go, they come back when it comes to space exploration. And of course, barring tragedies and things like that accidents it's inherently incredibly dangerous line of work.
Agreed.
But I am curious about that aspect as well. As we think about beyond, again, stationary orbit. So thinking about, going further into the solar system, right? Mars and beyond, and wondering about the psychology of us as humans of accepting, can we accept a one-way trip as we are sending people? Because I don't think there'll be no shortage of people who would volunteer knowing it's a one-way trip, but still, that's not part of the discussion, or at least not publicly anyway, right? That the discussion is, no, if we send them there, we bring them back. And I'm curious about that psychology of us as humans when it comes to exploration. And I was talking about this before too, but there's a great new documentary on Shackleton's trip to the South Pole, the Endurance, and the ultimate survival, no one will die, was his whole thing. And miraculously, they all made it. And it's this incredible human triumph to do that exploration, even though they didn't get where they were going. But through tragedy, they come back. Apollo 13, right? Everyone knows that story and that gripping of, we sent them out, a thing happens, and we will do everything in our power to bring them back. And the psychology of that versus, we're going to send people to Mars or beyond, but we're not going to come. They will end there. And whether or not we're, as a society, are we
ready for that?
Are we ready for that? Will we be ready for that? Because I think one thing that has always disappointed me even as a kid, as I was getting older and looking into this and would have daydreams of, I could be on Mars. But then also, again, that fragility of lifespan, knowing humans will probably never leave the solar system at all in current form, barring some other, series of sci-fi events. But yeah, what, how would that mean? Could we do a generation ship or something where we send humans knowing they're not coming back to Earth? We'll do everything we can to support them, but they're not coming back. I don't know.
People would ask us about their teenagers, and then they found out it was round trip, and they were like, "Oh, if they're going to come back, no." I'm just teasing. No, I think I've been thinking as you were talking. There's a fine line between, doing something like space, going to space, like I did. There's a certain chance that you are not coming home.
Right.
And how your family deals with that, how you deal with that. And is that different than knowing you cannot come home? I think it is different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the result can be the same for the family, perhaps, you know? And maybe it's comforting to think their loved ones are still out there even after they're gone. They just may not have been able to hear from them. Yeah. Exploration is going to take all forms, and especially now that there's not just one way to go and do it. I think we're going to see some interesting things. And it's been interesting as astronauts, I was talking about how we make the rules about what you could do and, whether we could launch with one booster or not. I mean, I'm just teasing, but, there'll be risks. Like they didn't really have a very great, idea of what radiation is doing. We're still working really hard on that.
Yep.
And yet, there's sort of rules like women have more organs that could get cancer, and so we actually can tolerate less radiation. And I'm like, well, I've had a lot of surgery.
Right.
I don't have all those. Can I go?
Yeah, right.
And they're like, well, no, but it comes down to sometimes people their inherent nature would be willing to take the risk, and sometimes sometimes the system won't support them in being human. And I think about that in war as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's such an interesting twist, that idea that to be human or to be the person you want to be, you have to step out of line sometimes with what society expects you to be. And it feels like there's something quite profound there, because you almost have to sort of break or bend the system. But it also strikes me, just listening to this. Well, like
maybe these small companies, I say small, but they're different companies, and Elon sent his car at least towards Mars, right?
Yes. And, it's going to be there waiting for him. It's
going to smack into something, some Martian. But I think, and Andrew, maybe this is where you were headed to. Is I wonder too about that. The difference between commercialized space exploration and government agency space exploration as well, and where that tolerance for risk is. Because to present, we are, as Americans, for example, familiar with pretty much predominantly just NASA's approach to human space flight. But what about commercial entities that wouldn't be bound by the same perspectives, the same accountability? And whether, because I still remember there was a company, this was back again, it's kind of 10 years ago. There was a Dutch company, I think, that was letting people volunteer and sign up to have a one-way ticket to Mars, assuming they could.
The Mars 100?
Yeah. Yep.
Is that what it was?
There.
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course that kicked off that whole, back then even about would you do the one-way trip? But again, I think about that too, in terms of just the commercial versus government agencies and where that risk, or to Andrew, to your point, like if you want to step outside that range and you've got the resources to do it, you can do it.
Right.
Versus, I don't know what that'll be, or what kind of changes that will stimulate.
I'm interested to hear Andrew's take and your take on that too. I will say that we've had a lot of practice already.
Yeah.
Like when we fly with the Russians, they have a different system. They have they are more inclined to, something happens that needs investigated. They do the investigation. I mean, you learn to trust and how to trust, and it might be a different way of trusting that is easy for you, right? And then 3 days before the launch, they say, it's all fixed, here's why, right? And we've learned to find a way to make that happen together, with the Russians, with international partners, and with SpaceX as well. And NASA does have a say when there are NASA astronauts on board, right?
Yep.
But they don't have a say otherwise. Go ahead, Andrew.
Right. No. I was going to say, I think a lot of people miss this because they watch the media headlines and the media stories about space and space exploration, especially if they're in the US, getting a US perspective, and they really miss the nuance of how different nations and different people actually work together to make things actually happen in a positive way. And I had the sense, and especially sort of having spoken to you and with you over the years, that there are stories there that really sort of underpin just how sort of diverse and constructive and collaborative all of this is in ways that I think a lot of people miss.
And which means that they, as people, have the power to make those bridges. Like in the early days, working with the Russians, there's the engineers and the doctors that would go over to Star City. And I mean, we're talking, they're cooking in a little hot plate and they're washing their clothes in the sink. And, it's more, it just was, it's sort of the Wild West for us as Americans over there. And yet they're making links with the Russian, flight surgeons. And, during the day, they're like, okay, so what's going to happen to our people when you do this? What are you measuring? What are you going to do with that data? But then when you're having, a shish kebab together,
right?
And so-and-so has a daughter, and you have a daughter, and that's where those bridges are formed. And I think you can take those conversations straight from, trying to have a space program together because politics has married you, right? To, a sustainability cause where you have all these different interests, and interests in people with different capabilities to address the same challenge together.
Yes.
And and I often am giving like the speech at the beginning or the end of one of those kind of 3-day meetings where if I'm in the beginning, I go, listen, I mean, there is no time to be shy. You have to introduce yourself. You have to say what you bring, what you're proud of, because people won't know. And you don't have a lot of time to work together. You leave here and you'll be more dispersed. Work together now. And so I think, it's all related.
Yeah. Which feels like it resonates an awful lot with the book Sharing Space, which is a nice way to bring that in.
Oh, thank you. Here, I'm taking another picture. Wait a minute. Here we go.
We'll have the video so you can see this. Right? But I think a lot of what you talk about in the book is really sort of bringing those perspectives and experiences sort of down to earth and making them meaningful to a vast array of people. Many people who couldn't actually physically go into space, but they still get that sense of what you have learned and others have learned about that experience.
Well, and I think it's important for two reasons. One is the lessons really do translate down here and people should use them. Right. And the other, if you look at it the other way, if you think, well, boy, those astronauts must just like go up there and these things happen and they do. I mean, it all just like they get selected. They don't even have to raise their hand. All these things happen magically. But when you find out that we're actually regular humans who, just like the young people that helped me get all this set up when everything went wrong today, that
it takes a team for a podcast.
It does. It takes a team, but also that, we have challenges and struggles and things that we do well and things that we don't. And I think that empowers people to realize that, okay, I'm who I've got. I bring what I bring. And how can I make sure that this gets used on a team? Because it turns out the things that I'm not so proud of actually happen to a lot of people and everybody's got stuff to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Well, Cady, I also want to be cognizant of your time. You've given us so much.
I'm a talker. Andrew knew.
We could go for. Well, if you
this is why we invited you.
Yeah,
well, I love the conversations that you've been having on these other episodes about how people see. I mean, it's just different ones. I just, it's fascinating, and I think it makes people feel good about thinking, wow, maybe that is part of being human.
Yeah,
I hope so.
And so, Cady, maybe I can ask you one last question.
Okay.
And that would be, so we often are talking about, the different futures that we can imagine and things like that. And not just a very soft question. You can take it any direction you'd like to go. But what is something that you sort of hope to see for humans in space in the future? And you can set the timeline, whatever future you want, near future, long-term future. What's something that you're hopeful to see?
I'm certainly hopeful. I mean, I'm excited to see people on the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, it is going to happen. It always takes longer than you think, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. But when we see, I mean, we're going to send the next group of people, and they're not going to land there, but there's going to, by going so far, we're going to be collecting a lot of data that's important to the safety of others who follow them, right? But they are going to get to look back at the Earth and see the Earth and the moon at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that will change them, and they will come back and they will change us. So I'm excited about living and working on the moon. That is so going to happen. I mean, it's partly because I think it's a logical place. It's not the only parallel path to get to Mars, which seems to be the next place to go.
Yep.
But I mean, I like it even when we see these, I don't know, all these little sparks of reality of like when something goes to an asteroid and collects dust from it and comes home with the samples.
Yeah, right.
It's just these reinforcements that the future really could hold really exciting things. And we just have to make sure, I think, that the younger generation is ready for that. And that means we have to do things that are not rocket science. We have to support education.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I likewise am just absolutely floored about how amazing humans are from time to time when we can do that engineering feat of sending a little rocket out on an orbit somewhere, touching down, grabbing dirt, and coming all the way back. Like, I mean, just absolutely incredible. But again, Cady, thank you so much for joining us today on Modem Futura. And be sure, if you're listening, again, we'll plug the book again, Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. Available where any books are sold, but prioritize small books.
Thanks
first.
very much. Hey, I was going to make one more kind of plug. Just because it's what we talked about, which was there's a documentary called Space, The Longest Goodbye. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe Andrew's seen it, but this is a documentary that was made with NASA. There's myself and my family are about a quarter of it. Caleb Barron, NASA astronaut, and a few other astronauts, Matthias Maurer from Germany, are part of it. And it's about, what is the effect on real people when they go to space and they live there, and how is it for their families?
Yeah.
Or their families
Fantastic.
they don't have yet.
Yeah.
And it's the most streamed PBS independent lens production to date. It's also on Apple and Amazon Prime, but I think it puts the human into human spaceflight, and you'll be glad you watch it. I cry every time you see my son as a 10-year-old from our home movies.
Goodness, yeah.
I know. It's actually, I've watched it. It is so personal and so authentic. Highly recommended. And again, Cady, it is called, for everybody who's looking for it now,
Space, The Longest Goodbye.
Space, The Longest Goodbye.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll drop a link to that in our show notes for sure, so people can just jump right to it.
Well, I just think people are wondering about the human part of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the most human thing you've ever seen NASA make. And it's
really
a
cool.
NASA and a really gifted director, Ido Mizrahi.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay. I cry every time, actually. It's been pretty wonderful to see with my 24-year-old and my 10-year-old at the same time.
Yes.
The same person.
Yeah.
And so I think it just speaks to a lot of people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I was just going to say, too, that must be a little bit surreal to look back and see the footage of yourself in space and then your children. You know what I mean? Like, that must be such a surreal experience to see that that timeline sort of exposed in that way.
Well, and sometimes even just it's actually really hard to watch where I see when the comm goes out for good, whatever reasons, right? And they're just like, and they got used to it, but it's still, they don't see me behind the camera rebooting, talking to the ground, blah, 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 and oh, mom's gone. Or there's actually a quote in this movie that says, my mom left the planet. But there's some ways, I think we all understand a lot about this, now for having COVID and
sure.
COVID, going through COVID together. And
sure. Well, and I love there's an anecdote in your book about when you were called well, I don't know. We haven't sworn yet on this podcast, but where you were called, were you called the worst parent? Because like you left the planet, you had a baby and you left the planet.
Exactly. But it was a group of women doing social media that wanted to celebrate that parenting isn't perfect. Mm-hmm. And all of us are like, oh, I probably should have. probably should have done that better.
Right.
Or it could have, or, can I kind of thing. We all do our best, I think.
Yeah. Well, and again, what I love about that again is you're normalizing. It's like, just as everybody has, women in the workforce have children and go back to work, your office just happened to be outside of our atmosphere.
Right.
So.
And you're a great mum anyway, so despite all of that. Or probably
thanks.
because of all of that.
Actually, my kid has been coming on my book tour.
Oh, really? There you are.
And it's
That's
working his butt off, actually.
Yeah. See, there's a side hustle opportunity. Like, you want the real deal? Come see my booth.
I know you guys are trying to have an arc to your podcast, and Andrew knows I think it's fascinating the stuff you talk about, and I like the podcast, and I appreciate getting to spend the afternoon with you.
No,
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, Cady. This has been fantastic catching up again.
And everybody heard it. Modem Futura is astronaut approved.
There we are.
And look,
Yep.
there's a spacecraft headed to the moon.
I know.
Last
The
February.
backdrop for those of you who are watching it on YouTube is fantastic. Those of you who are
This
listening.
is not a drawing.
Yeah.
This is a photograph.
Yeah. So
Intuitive Machines, Odysseus headed to the
Odie.
moon.
Yes.
Odie. Yep. And I mean, I don't work for them. I just they're nice enough to
You're
give
just
me
hanging
a
out in
place to
their offices
podcast.
talking to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Anyways,
Fantastic.
thanks very much, you guys.
Yes,
Thank
well,
you.
pleasure's all ours. Trust me. Thank you so much, Cady, for joining us. And yeah, Andrew, thank you again for piloting this spacecraft with me. So,
Oh, well, co-piloting, I think. But yes, this has been great, Sean.
fantastic. And thanks for everyone for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode of Modem Futura.
End transmission.